him to death yesterday by saying I know all sorts of things about him, and I do, but I'm not. The thing I'm going to share with the thing I'm going to share with you is that he is my wordsmith, because I know what I want to say, but I don't know how to say it, and he's got plenty of spare words. So I go along to him and say, this is what I want to do, and whether it's my blog or a presentation or anything like that, he will write it for me. And so I think he's a great man to have on side if you're trying to do your script. And little does he know, I'm about to come back to him with some ideas for a script for me, so that Penny can help me produce it properly for a video. So a lot of my friends are here. So Allan, as not in your role as chair of the Stow Chamber, but in your role as wordsmith, Millhouse Media, take it away.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll just set up the screen share, Colin, if that's okay, so we can get the PowerPoint on. So that's that one. Right, and there we go. Right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thanks very much for coming. I'd like to start by introducing you to my grandfather. This is Ernest Scott. He served in the Royal Flying Corps in the First World War, but nothing glamorous. His job was protecting observation balloons, like this one, from the ground with one of these, the Lewis gun. Now, I don't know much about his time in the trenches because I actually never met him, and apparently he didn't talk about it. But there was one story he did tell, and for years I would quote that story. He said supplies were always a big problem. Sometimes they'd have too much, more often they wouldn't have enough. And on one occasion, he said, they had a huge surplus of tinned bully beef. The weather was bad and the trench was starting to collapse. So they reinforced it with dozens of unwanted tins. Now, as happened in trench warfare, the line moved backwards and forwards over the next few months. So landmarks and positions were constantly changing. But one day, my grandfather heard an officer complaining, "We could really use some more rations for the men." So he looked around, spotted something strangely familiar in that shattered landscape, and said, "Excuse me, sir, but you could try digging over there." It's a good story, but that's all it is, a story. Later, I found that it was told again and again by soldiers in different regiments, in different positions, at different times, because the truth was just too hard to share with wives and families at home. In other words, it was a story tailored for a particular audience, in this case, his young wife and his 4-year-old son, who wasn't too sure of the difference between Germans and germs. And that's the first rule of good marketing: know your audience. It's also the first of the 5 areas I want to cover today, which are understanding your audience, deciding how to talk to them, writing for the spoken word, making visuals work for you, and knowing how to tell a story. It took me a while to come up with my strapline, which is, as you know, our business is telling your story. But if you're writing a script, that's your business too. So you need to learn a little of the magic that made my grandfather's story work so well. So with that in mind, let's take those 5 elements one at a time and see how you can craft a script that works for your audience, for your business, and of course for you. A script that delivers your message in just the right way, and just as importantly, in a way that you can actually deliver. Because it has to be something you can say out loud, without hesitation, repetition, or deviation. So let's begin with your audience, as any good writer should, because your video needs to win their engagement. Okay, I'm not asking you to get down on one knee and propose to your clients, but I am asking you to think about them as people, not just names on a list or numbers on a chart. So ask yourself, who are they? What kinds of business are they in? What will interest them and what won't? And what tone of voice is appropriate when you're talking to them? Think about it. You wouldn't talk to the boss of a major global corporation in the way you talk to the owner of your corner shop, because they have very different types of business, very different concerns, and probably very different interests. But critically, if you want their engagement, they'll need very different types of information. So, what's the secret? Well, I've been about 40 years in this game, so I'd say it's a very simple one. Just put yourself in their shoes. Try to see your business from their perspective. Now, that can be tricky because you'll need to change your normal viewpoint, which is, if you like, about 6 inches away from the action. That's entirely understandable. Of course, you're close to your own business. Of course, you understand all the details. It's yours. You built it, you own it, but you can't always see what's important for other people. Let me give you an example. I was once taking the brief for a huge UK company specializing in engineering. I'll let them remain anonymous, but at least one of you will be able to work this out. They wanted a corporate video, so we were discussing which project we could use for the opening sequence. Various projects were suggested, and I tried very, very hard to be a good lad and keep my mouth shut. But eventually I caved in. How about that bridge you're working on? I said. The client looked a little baffled. You know, the one between Denmark and Sweden? Still a blank look. The longest road rail bridge in Europe? Oh, that one. Yes, that one. You may have come across it yourself. It even got its own TV show a few years back. Now, I'd hate to imply you're as short-sighted as that client, but for this particular exercise, you really do need to stand back from the detail, see it as others see it. If you can't, I do know it's difficult, then have a word with your best customers. Ask them for some honest feedback. You may well be pleasantly surprised, and you could find they're focused on things you'd hardly even thought about, which, after all, might be exactly what you need to hear. Because you need to know which part of your offering is most relevant to your audience, what makes them buy it, and hopefully go on buying it, and how you can best present it to get the interest and attention of your new prospects. When you've done that, you need to think about how you should talk to them. So, with that in mind, let me give you 5 rules of engagement. First, talk to an audience of 1, unless you're in a Zoom meeting, of course. If you're on camera, please remember you're not addressing a public meeting. So there are some phrases you'll want to avoid. Phrases like, some of you may know, or thanks to all of you. Just imagine one person standing right behind the camera. Talk to that person and keep your eyes on them, just as you would if they were really there. That has an added benefit because it means you'll be looking directly at your audience, which I'm sure is what Steve would also advise. Now, there are a few pronouns it's also worth avoiding, as far as possible anyway. As Kim Morrison would say, don't we on the client. That's your second rule. What does that mean? Well, avoid using the words we, us, I, and my as much as possible. And if those particular pronouns start to creep into your writing, weed them out. Clients should be hearing the word you far more often. This is what you will see. It's about getting the results you've asked for. It's designed to meet your needs. Of course, there's one exception, and that's when you're interviewing a satisfied client, one who's prepared to give you a testimonial, in which case you'll be happy to hear I and we when they talk about their good experience. But you'll also hope for a few theys, and perhaps some actual mention of your name when they tell people how good you are. Moving on then. Thirdly, assume your audience know nothing, but don't assume they're stupid. For instance, on one occasion, I was asked to script a video about an army base in Germany. The audience would be the civil servants in charge of their budget. I can't talk about it too much because I actually had to sign the Official Secrets Act before I went there. But surprise, surprise, my first briefing was studded with acronyms, which meant absolutely nothing to me. And I strongly suspected would mean very little to their audience either. So, I had to stop the base commander in mid-flow and politely ask him to spell out which each and every acronym actually stood for. Then there's jargon. Rule 4, jargon is only useful to people who understand it. If they do, it's valuable shorthand. If they don't, well, I can't think of a better way to lose an audience in about 30 seconds flat. There's nothing wrong with technical language in a technical context when you're talking to your peers. Like those acronyms, it does save a ton of explanation. But you do need to be absolutely certain that no explanation is necessary. And finally, last rule, keep your language simple. Short sentences, everyday language, stuff that's easy to say and easy to understand, because there's an art to writing for the spoken word. Writing a script isn't quite like writing anything else, because you or someone else will have to read it aloud, and that can be tricky even for a professional. Stephen Fry, a master of spoken English, likes to tell a story against himself. He was happy to read the entire Harry Potter saga for full-length audiobooks, which was no mean feat in itself. Happy until he came to one apparently simple phrase. Harry pocketed it. He stumbled, tried again, stumbled again, kept on stumbling. Fry takes up the story himself. So I called her up and said, "Look, do you mind? I can't say Harry pocketed it. Would it be okay if I said Harry put it in his pocket?" There was a big pause at the end of the line. Then she said, "No," in her best witch's voice. I could hear her smile as she said it. And the story didn't end there. Mischievously, Rowling put exactly the same phrase into all her later books. Now, I've had the pleasure of writing for many professional voice artists and from some very eminent professionals, including the boss of a high street bank, the boss of a major airport, and the boss of the country's largest waste disposal company. But most have a similar problem. There'll be a particular word or phrase that causes them difficulty, so it has to be changed or rewritten. You may well find that you have the same problem. So what can you do about it? My advice? Learn from the best. Whether or not you're a fan of Tony Blair, and by no means everybody is, he was a brilliant performer, and his speeches were brilliant too. Whoever wrote them, wasn't me, by the way. He used short sentences, clear language, simple but powerful phrases. Stuff, in fact, that was easy to say, but just as importantly, stuff that was easy to understand, because that's the thing about spoken word. You don't want long sentences. They aren't just challenging to say, they're also challenging to listen to. And attention spans are getting shorter. So people may lose track of where you're going before you get to the end. We'll also notice something else about spoken word. It's not strictly grammatical. It doesn't follow the rules you may well have been taught at school. And it's not unusual for sentences to start with a preposition, like that one did, because that's how people talk. But if you're scripting for video, there are 3 more things you need to think about. Firstly, you need to keep it short. The days of 20-minute corporate videos are long gone. I made good money writing them back in the day, but I didn't like them then, and no one likes them now. Think 2 minutes, max. Secondly, and to manage that, you need to plan carefully. How can you put your message across succinctly? What are the key points? And thirdly, think visual. Could you make those points with images or captions so they don't need to be in the voiceover? Because please remember, what you're writing is a visual script, and that's an art in itself. Now, over the years, as you gathered, I've worked with some very large companies. To give you an example, I was once asked to write the script for a big presentation at a conference for gas engineers. The presenter was a chap called Cedric Brown. At the time, he was the chief engineer on the Morecambe Bay gas field. And back in those days before video, I was working with his team to create a high-powered slideshow. More high-powered than most, in fact. We were using 9 slide projectors and a 35mm movie projector. The opening sequence showed views of the gas field from the air, rather like this one. Those blended seamlessly into movie footage of a chopper landing on the main drilling platform. Out of the chopper stepped Cedric Brown, suited and booted, and wearing a pristine orange life jacket. He walked towards the camera, out of shot, and emerged on stage in the same suit with the same life jacket. And he stole the show. In due course, as you may know, he became the CEO of British Gas. And a few years later, he was one of the first big company bosses to earn a reputation as a fat cat, and spent several weeks being as unpopular in the press as someone else is at the moment. And for that, I have to take my share of the blame, along, of course, with the excellent British Gas production team, because I know the show we prepared for him knocked everyone else's into a cocked hat and quite possibly contributed to his rapid promotion. And my point? Those images did all the work. They didn't need a voiceover, which is why I prefer to draw up my video scripts in 3 columns like this. One for the visuals, one for the voiceover, and one for anything else on the soundtrack, music or sound effects, for example. I lay out those 3 columns on a wide page in landscape format to give myself plenty of room. That's what I do when I'm scripting for a client, because usually I'll be working with a production team, so they do the actual videography and, of course, the graphics and sound. My job is to come up in advance with a plan, to narrow down what they're going to shoot, what they will focus on, what kind of images we'll need, what graphics or animation footage, if any, we'll need to create, and what extra equipment, like a drone or a Steadicam, we might need to achieve that. Because that way we can keep control of the budget and manage client expectations. That's important because, thinking back, all too often I'd send in a draft script and then get a very worrying message back from the client. Oh, we do like it, but the CEO has a few notes. Worrying? Well, yes, because in my experience, the CEO will often ignore the visuals altogether. Instead, she or he will zero in on the voiceover and add a few hundred words of their own. 2 problems with that. It'll double the length of the video, and it'll usually be difficult or impossible to read aloud. It will also need extra visuals to support the new copy. So we'll be looking at doubling or trebling the shooting time and the budget. In fairness, when we break the bad news, most clients do see sense. Not all of them do. So bear that in mind when you're doing your own script, because, to coin a phrase, it's only your own time you'll be wasting. So when you're planning that script, keep the images in mind all the time. In fact, because this is a visual medium, try to think of the images first. Of course, you're going to need talking heads, yours and other people's. And if you have products, you'll need images of them as well. But is there an image that captures the heart of your offer? Ideally, one that hasn't been used 100 times before. And if not, could you create one? Because the right image, right at the beginning, can be far more important than the first thing you actually say. And while you're at it, don't forget the soundtrack either. I learned that lesson on literally my very first freelance assignment, when, to my delight, I won a contract as a scriptwriter for Kodak. This was way back in the days before digital photography, when Kodak was the undisputed world leader in 35mm film technology. One of their photographers lived near the Thames. He had thousands of photographs he'd taken up and down the river. Kodak wanted a script that would showcase his work, using 4 slide projectors and some impressive control software. I wrote the voiceover. Robert Hardy recorded it, and apparently even said nice things about it. And in due course, I was invited to see the result. They sat me down in a small studio. The lights went down, and I waited for the buzz and crackle of the soundtrack. Remember when this was? It didn't happen. Instead, I saw a superb sequence of images as dawn broke over the river. And then, out of nowhere, I heard the opening bars of a beautifully atmospheric music track. No buzz, no crackle, the first digital soundtrack I'd ever encountered, and the effect was stunning. The show went on to win a couple of major awards, and I even caught it on the IMAX screen in Bradford a few years later, so obviously it had the same impact on other people. And that, dear listeners, had absolutely nothing to do with my script, apart from my suggestion in the visuals column that we start with a sunrise sequence. So it's time to come back to where we started and discuss the rules of storytelling. Okay, you know your audience, you know the kind of language they will understand, and you know what you want to tell them. Now you need to put the show together to tell your story in words, pictures and sounds quickly, economically and effectively, which means you need a structure, a shape, a flow, from a strong start right through to final, effective calls to action. So you'll be glad to know that good storytelling has rules, ready-made structures that can help you deliver the goods to maximum effect. So what are those rules? Well, I have to admit, I learned them the hard way. Back in my teens, yeah, that's me looking smug in the middle, I was running the Oxford University Speculative Fiction Group, and I was also running and contributing to their short story magazine, Sphinx. We were lucky enough to have some of the best writers in the business as guests at our meetings, so we asked one of them, James Blish, to review the stories in our latest magazine. Some he praised, with good reason. Mine he ripped to bits, also with very good reason. And then he told us exactly how to construct a good story, free, gratis, and for nothing. A good short story, Jim said, starts with a problem, something your central character has to deal with, something to find a solution for. As the story goes on, the problem seems, if anything, to get more challenging, and events build to a crisis, at which point a hero or heroine finds a solution, based, for instance, on a clue which you carefully planted way back in the opening couple of paragraphs. In my second novel, that involved some careful rewrites at the beginning, though in fairness, I had changed the ending as well. And I can thank Jim for the fact I got published at all. There's also a kind of mirror image version of the Blish formula. A thoroughly nasty character spots an opportunity, say a chance to profit from the biggest scam of all time, sets to work, and everything goes well for them. They're making a fortune until right at the end, something trips them up, and the whole thing comes down around their ears. A bit like my friend Cedric Brown, for example. Now, there are other structures, other formats, but that one works very well. I like to think of it as a three-part formula. There's the hook, the thing that gets you interested. There's the line, the careful planned development of the plot. And the sinker, the final completely satisfying denouement. Look at almost any successful film and you'll see it at work. So how can you use it to create a successful presentation? Well, let me give you an example by telling you another story. Way back in 1983, I just launched my new career as a freelance copywriter, editor and scriptwriter. And I've been hired by a visual production company to write a script for their latest corporate client. He was based at a factory way up in the Pennines. And his business? He made wooden pallets. Not the most exciting subject to write about. So, after a 4-hour drive, I sat down for a briefing. And in the course of the next hour and a half, I learned everything I didn't want to know about wooden pallets. Like most business owners, the MD was so close to his subject he couldn't see the wood for the trees, if you'll pardon the expression. What he did say about trees, about an hour in, was quite useful, because he told me they were very particular about the timber they used, which made their pallets slightly more expensive than some of the competition. You see, he said, it's important for the pallets to be as strong as possible under compression. I began to see an opening. Why, I asked, is that so important? Well, he said, think of a production line with a series of pallets going onto it, pressing up against each other. If one of those pallets is too weak to take the strain, I get it, I said. The whole line stops because of one faulty pallet. And there, in a nutshell, was the problem and the solution. Now, this was a time when the very first games were starting to appear on personal computers. So our show began with a simulated game called Production Line, with pallets being added one at a time until one of them broke. And it was game over. Okay, so that was the hook sorted. The line is very simple, a line of argument pointing out that any pallet is only as good as the timber used to make it, and that this company chose a particular timber that made their pallets stronger and less likely to collapse under pressure. And the sinker? A simple argument. Don't take the risk, use the best. Now, I'd say that I'm probably a storyteller first and a marketer second. But when you're building a visual script, those two roles go hand in hand. The language is sometimes different, but the intention is the same. For example, I talk about what makes a good hook for a story. A marketer will talk about the difference between features and benefits. So what is the difference? Well, a feature might be something like a turbo-powered widget drive. Sounds good, probably, but what does it actually do? Well, suppose the next few words said, to pick up more dust than any other cleaner on the market. If they did, you'd know why it was important. In other words, you'd know the benefit. So in that story about the pallets, superior quality timber was the feature, making them far more resistant to crush damage was the benefit. And you've already seen how we turned that into a story. We made that benefit the hook, the attention grabber at the start. In a newspaper story, it'd be the headline. In the Jim Blish formula, it's the problem. And in a video, it's the opening shot, the first caption, the first words, or yes, the first sound. So, you have a product or service that benefits your clients. What problem does it solve? How does it do that? How does it make life better or easier or more comfortable for your clients? Maybe another example would help you answer that question. Recently, I was asked to script a video for the Charles Burrell Centre in Thetford. It's a project designed to support both local businesses and the wider community. The aim of the video was to attract new business tenants. So our hook was a fast-paced opening sequence featuring companies already based there and repeatedly using the word busy. Our line was a series of snappy vox pops where current tenants talked about the benefits of working there and how it had helped them. That was intercut with shots of their companies in action to keep the pace up. The sinker featured short vox pops with centre staff, hinting at even better things to come. And the strap line, busy at the heart of the community. All done and dusted in 2.5 minutes. Couldn't be simpler, really. But the approach surprised and pleased the client because they hadn't thought of it. So, let me walk you through one possible formula for your next video, and I must stress it's not the only one, but I do know it works. Start by presenting the problem that your offer solves. You can do that with images and a voiceover, or you could do it by cutting together vox pop interviews with clients who had the problem and can give a brief, cogent description of it. That's the hook. Your line? That's the bit where you explain, preferably with pictures and sometimes perhaps with captions, what your offer is and what the benefits are. Remember, benefits not features. And the sinker? Well, in an ideal world, get those same clients to tell everyone how good your offer is, because that way you don't have to, and you won't we on the clients either. Here enters the 5th lesson with one caveat. Play with those rules, experiment, try breaking them, because in the end, there are no rules, except perhaps one. If it works, do it. One last thing. As my personal offer to chamber members, I'm prepared to spend an hour with anyone who needs help with scripting their promo video. You'll get the details in a follow-up email. That's all I want to say today. I hope it's been helpful, and I'll be delighted to answer any questions. So now, over to you.
Well, I think that was absolutely fantastic, Alan. Thank you very much. And I think everybody can see why you're my wordsmith now. So, any questions from anyone, please?
Did I see a sign from Catherine, or were you just? I think Catherine has one. We unmute
Colin,
her.
can you unmute Catherine?
Yeah, she's now gone.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi. Yeah, I mean that was fantastic, Alan. It's such a breadth of experience. Slightly, my question is for those of us who are slightly further down the scale of you know, starting out with the idea of putting a video on social media, something like that. We don't have we can't afford to have someone do our visuals for us, soundtracks, any of that. But we still need to talk and get a message across. So I wonder, I mean, obviously a lot of what you said will still apply, but I wondered if you had more specific advice.
Yeah, well, one thing to bear in mind
chat.
is that if you're doing it yourself, think about using perhaps stills and graphics as well as just your talking head. You can do that. It's not too difficult to do if need be. You know, you can actually have stuff that you can shoot. But I mean, I think purely for if you like a one-off personal video where you're talking directly to camera, just think about the structure that I said. You know, the format. Keep it short, keep it sweet, keep it punchy. And you know, if you can do some basic video editing, and you know, think about, I don't know, you want to possibly have a look at Steve Stoddart's piece on that, because he actually gave you some very useful ideas on technique for doing that, including editing video, which is going to make some of the stuff I was talking about possible. You can actually do more than you think you may be able to do. But for the basics, just think about the structure, think about the storytelling, you know. And I mean, you, Catherine, of all people, I know you. You are a very good writer yourself.
Not just asking for me.
You'll be fine. Any more questions, guys? Kate?
Yeah. Alan, yeah, presumably when you're writing a script, particularly if you've got a videographer involved, there's going to be a collaborative approach between videographer, script writer, and inevitably how something is shot can affect the script.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, in your experience, I mean, how often can this be sort of, you know, the version 1 of the script end up being a version 6, the final version that you run with? And can this affect, of course, how long it takes? You know, whether 2 minutes actually stretches to 2 minutes 20. Is that okay for that extra 20 seconds?
Oh, sure,
you know, what's your take on that?
No, you're quite right. I mean, it is a collaboration, and I mean, you know, as you'll have gathered, when I'm working with a production company, you know, there is a budget to work to. I know that from day one, and as a script writer, if I'm in that kind of relationship, then my job is to make sure they don't bust the budget. Or if they do bust the budget, the client knows why it's happening and has agreed to it. Which is why also sometimes you have to come down like a ton of bricks on the client when they try and make changes you know are going to bust the budget, you know, completely. But yeah, there's a collaboration involved, and yes, sure, sometimes I will change the script. I mean, sometimes what happens is that the videographer's out on site, perhaps, I'll have done the script in advance, but they spot something that neither of us would even have thought of, you know, and you have to allow for that. So yes, of course, it's an ongoing process. It's a dialogue almost between director and script writer. So yeah, quite so. And you know, ideally, really, they should be working hand in hand as a team and talking to each other all the time. And certainly,
but how important do you find it is? I mean, you get professional people who do overdubs. You know, the nature and the timbre of the voices can sometimes be highly specific to the video. So
yes.
Do you find that actually can also make a difference as who actually is doing the speaking?
Oh yeah, it does. You know, I've worked with, as I said, quite a number of different voiceover artists over the years, and it does make a difference. It doesn't make a huge difference. I mean, as long as you know, it's
speak clearly.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's maybe a particular tone you're looking for, perhaps. And I mean, if I'm involved in the actual voiceover recording session, which I haven't always been, but sometimes I've been directing it, you know, you can actually point that up to the voiceover artist. Again, you want to build a relationship with them too. And, you know, as with the Stephen Fry thing, if they've got a problem with a particular phrase, sometimes you literally, I mean, I've had to do this. You'll change it literally in the recording studio on the day, you know. Maybe you have to ring the client and clear that before they do it.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
Penny.
Yes,
Alan, do you find you're talking about the length of a video, and I completely agree with you. Is this 2 minutes max? Certainly, if you're doing an introductory and overview video. But are there areas where you might create a video that is quite okay to be a lot longer? I mean, recently I've watched through one that was actually two and a half hours long, but it was of a subject that I was particularly interested in, and the person delivering it was also quite listenable. I could listen to him. I watched another one of just over an hour. That was actually a podcast because it had 2 other people. And then I watched one recently, 15 minutes, still a subject I'm interested in, but I thought I actually couldn't listen to this person for a lot longer, so I probably wouldn't listen to anything longer.
Yeah.
So, but with podcasts and yes, promotional videos and then longer informational, it's sort of the lines are getting blurred. I don't know whether, Steve, you're finding this with the actual visuals, you know.
Yeah, I think, no, you're quite right.
What keeps people listening and engaged, and is there rules for keeping it short and brief, and then rules for where it's okay to be longer?
Well, I think if we were talking about promo videos specifically, and I think they need to be punchy. But I mean, give you another example. I worked on a show about the Clarence Mills in Hull, which is a historic building that they were going to close it down. I think 2005 it was, simply because the equipment in there didn't comply with modern safety standards. But it was a wonderful story behind that, and that video ran, I think, for about 20 minutes. But it was like a short documentary, basically. It's a different animal, you know. You've got an awful lot of different things going on screen. You know, you've got a mixture between historic footage, interviews with people who were there, voiceover and archive footage, all kinds of stuff. So, you know, there's plenty of changes of pace and voice and visual to keep your interest. But I think, you know, when you're doing a hard sell, really 2 minutes is about as much as people can put up with. So, yeah, I mean, horses for courses, like everything else, Penny, I quite agree. And I mean, yes, you can make a program last for an hour, or you wouldn't have hour-long TV programs.
I have a question at the other end, Alan. Because, I mean, obviously you're right. Yes, I watch a lot of documentaries on television, and they are, you know, an hour long, and they're fascinating. But they've also got much larger budgets. And when it's me doing something like Facebook Live, or just doing a quick thing for social media, so that's what I mean about the far end. And we're talking about me following all the rules that Steve set out in his thing. And how much does, in your opinion, how much does the professionalism matter, given that we're all a bit more rough and ready on social media?
I'm not sure you need to be totally professional necessarily. I mean, a little bit of personality is not a bad thing. The point is, though, as long as it works, if you like, that was the last point I was making. You know, you can break all the rules, but does it work? And the best way to find that out, of course, is to, if you can, pre-record something, ideally, and run it past a friend who's prepared to be rude if they need to be. You know, get someone else's view on it if you're worried about it at all. You know, that's probably the best way to go.
But I guess the whole thing about the problem, and you know, this is the problem you have. These are the things you can that could make it even worse. And by the way, you know, if you pay me lots of money, I can solve this for you. That theme still works, doesn't it?
It still does. I mean, I can't tell you how many bits of copy I've written that way as well over the years. You know, I had a spell when I was writing a lot of stuff for a particular internet-based company, the best of sorry, I got to think about the name for a minute there. I'm getting old, obviously. I was doing a lot of stuff for the best of, and they needed short articles about companies who were represented on the best of. And that formula basically was what I almost used for all of them, you know, one way or another. There's different takes you can do on it, but it works. Okay. Any more questions, guys?
No? Well, I'm looking at the time.
Steve?
Steve?
Oh, sorry.
Steve?
Okay, just...
Penny, I don't know if you've seen my comment, but the thing about video length is if you did see it. Okay,
Yeah.
so if others, just in case others haven't, if you've got a video that's about a specific subject, it's not an about us or whatever, it can be as long as it needs to be.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I did a video for a crew. There were 2 sets of videos, one each of 45 minutes, because we thought 90 minutes, that's too long, so broke it into 2. So there's no problem in making a video as long as it needs to be when it covers a specific subject. In fact, it needs to be.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
can't
exactly.
cram all that into 2 minutes. So
No.
it's not a problem.
I'd agree with that, but we were talking specifically about promo videos here,
Yeah.
you know, and there I think you do need to keep it short and snappy. You know, for your own sake and the sake of the audience, really, that's about as much as they're going to want to hear.
Yeah. And Catherine, you mentioned something which Alan actually touched upon, this thing about editing and all the rest of it. In the handout that I made available to the video that I did, if there's some questions about that, drop me a line and perhaps I can fill in some blanks, because I'm sure there are blanks in it. So by all means, drop us a line if you want to.
But that video, Steve, is now, I think, if it's not available online, it will be shortly. I think Kate's going to say something about that in a minute, if I remember rightly.
Yeah,
So,
I was actually, if everybody's okay with this, I'm just aware that people do have to go, and we did say 45 minutes. So I just wanted to thank Alan very much for his talk.
Thank you, Alan.
Brilliant. And I think it's gone very well. Where we had our very first one was talking about marketing, and actually we now have the video of the marketing talk online, which you can order if you weren't able to attend. You can click on that and you have, you know, it's the same price of a cuppa, and we can send you the video. Please remember that the videos we're taking here are videos of the live script, so it rather depends on the internet connection. So but you're buying it for its content, you know. This is the classic thing, you're buying it for its content. We also have some more things coming up since these were so popular, and our next one is going to be about mindset. Linda Barber is going to talk about mindset, because one of the things we're noticing very much with people is that they're getting a bit frantic coming out of lockdown. There's an awful lot of worry coming out, some of which is real and some of which is just internalized, and it's how to deal with that. So by popular acclamation, our next one will be on mindset. Very shortly there will be a newsletter going out talking about the next range of seminars. So the usual rule, people, if you've enjoyed this, please go on social media and say how wonderful it was. And please tell all your friends. And if there's any feedback that you would like to give us about anything that we could improve, please let us know, you know, by private message. So the old things about tell us if it's not worked, tell your friends if it has.